Welcome to Crimes Through Time, snapshots of crime history. The evening of the 14th of December 1958 should have been one of celebration for 25-year-old scaffolder Ronald Henry Marwood and his wife. It was their first wedding anniversary, and they had planned a night of drinking and dancing to mark the occasion. However, his wife would feel too ill to go out, so she told him to go and have a good time with the lads instead, while she relaxed at their home on Huntington Street, Islington. And a good time he had, reportedly enjoying 10 pints of brown ale throughout the night. Ronald and his friends arrived at Gray's Dance Academy on Seven Sisters Road, Holloway, around 11 p.m. Outside, they would run into another group of men. Although both gangs were teddy boys, a fierce fight broke out. Unfortunately, it wasn't just fists that were flying. The men were armed with choppers, knives, knuckle dusters and broken bottles. Now, teddy boys were a British youth subculture that emerged following World War II. Their music of choice was American rock and roll and R&B, and their clothes were inspired by the Edwardian era dandies, lots of tapered trousers, long jackets and fancy waistcoats. Now, you may think this is a strange choice for young men in the poverty-stricken east and south of London, but it was actually the result of an unsuccessful attempt to revive the English fashion industry following the years of clothes rationing. Their target market was the young officers demobbing from the various services, but after years in uniform, this excessively smart trend failed to catch on, and so they opted for a more comfortable style, which flooded the menswear shops with very cheaply priced fancy clothes, and the working class adopted this trend instead. They finished their look with a very distinctive hairstyle, the DA, or duck's arse, well, because it looks like a duck's bum. These men had disposable income, a strong desire to look different from their fathers, and an appetite for rebellion. The name Teddy Boys was coined on the 23rd of September 1953 by a newspaper, the Daily Express, when a reporter writing about the various gangs' antisocial activities shortened Edwardian to Teddy when referencing their distinctive style. Now back to the 14th of December 1958. 23-year-old PC Raymond Henry Summers was patrolling Seven Sisters Road alone when he came upon the two Teddy Boy gangs brawling. He made an attempt to separate the sides. He grabbed Michael David Bloom, a friend of Ronald's. Ronald would claim that he had been hit with a chopper and was already feeling dizzy and sick. He approached Ray from behind. The policeman told him to go away or clear off and punched him. Ronald took his hands out of his pockets and struck out at the PC. The 6'5" man was stabbed in the back with a 10-inch stiletto knife. He fell to the pavement, where he would succumb to his wound. Ronald ran from the scene, tossing the knife over a garden wall, where it was later retrieved. The police began interviewing the gang members the following morning. Ronald denied being involved. In fact, he couldn't have been involved. He was actually brawling in Finsbury Park. He was released and returned home. That evening, he would have a telephone conversation with Michael Bloom that left him so scared he made the decision to leave his new wife and go on the run. Eventually, the police would realise that Ronald had been lying and return to question him further, discovering that he was on the lam. A manhunt was launched and Ronald's photograph was published in the newspapers. Ultimately, Ronald's conscience would get the better of him, and he would turn himself in to the Caledonian Road police station on the 27th of January 1959, unable to live with what had happened. He would admit, quote, "I did stab the copper that night. I will never know why I did it. I have been puzzling over in my mind during the last few weeks why I did it, but there seems no answer." He was arrested and charged with the murder of a police officer in the execution of his duty. Now, according to the police, he then gave a full and frank confession, but Ronald would plead not guilty at his committal hearing at North London Court and remanded into custody until his trial in March 1959. In February 1959, 11 youths went on trial for crimes committed during that brawl where PC Summers had lost his life. 9 were found not guilty of unlawful assembly with intent to disturb the peace, and possession of offensive weapons. One was convicted on the assembly charge and sentenced to 6 months in prison. One was convicted of possession of an offensive weapon and was sentenced to 15 months. Despite the introduction of the Homicide Act in 1957, the first legislative move to the abolition of the death penalty in the UK, which would come in 1965, the murder of a police officer in the line of duty was still a capital crime. Ronald was facing the death penalty. The Homicide Act of 1957 was pivotal in reshaping the legal landscape for the crime of murder in England and Wales. By introducing defences like diminished responsibility and provocation, it acknowledged the complex interplay between motive, mental state and criminal responsibility, allowing for more equitable and tailored justice in cases of unlawful killing. It differentiated between manslaughter, murder and capital murder. The introduction of the capital murder category was aimed at restricting the use of the death penalty to particularly egregious types of murder, marking a shift towards a more selective approach to capital punishment. So for capital murder, you would need to murder in the course or furtherance of theft, murder by shooting or causing an explosion, murder while resisting arrest or escaping from legal custody, and finally the murder of a police or prison officer in the execution of their duty. Ronald's trial would open at the Old Bailey on the 19th of March 1959 in front of Mr Justice Gorman. Prosecution was led by Mr Christmas Humphreys and the defence by Neil Lawson and Mr M Levine. Ronald took the stand in his own defence. He told the court that he and Michael Bloom had been drinking all evening, first in the Spanish Patriots pub, before moving to the Double R Club, which was owned by Ronnie and Reggie Cray at this time, meeting up with friends and then going with them to Gray's Dance Academy. He recalled PC Summer grabbing Michael as the fight was underway. He admitted to approaching the pair and pushing back against the policeman after he punched him for not obeying the command to clear off. Lawson QC asked if he had anything in his hand. Ronald replied, "No, sir." Ronald's defence was that in his drunken state and with the adrenaline pumping, he hadn't realised he had the knife in his hand when he pushed out. Quote, "He struck me in the region of my shoulder. I remember I had my hands in my overcoat pockets. I pulled out my hands, intending to push him away. I must have had my hand on the knife in my right hand pocket. I struck out with the intention of pushing him away from me. I remember striking him with the knife and the policeman fell. I ran away and I kept on running." The defence alleged the confession he had given at Caledonian Road Police Station was coerced and in part completely fabricated. Ronald had signed it without reading it after 10 solid hours of questioning. Now this was denied by Detective Superintendent Robert Fenwick when he took the stand. When Lawson summed up for the defence, he highlighted the only evidence that indicated PC Summers was murdered was the contested confession. Ronald had previous good character, having completed his 2 years national service, and he was described in his discharge book as, quote, "a thoroughly reliable man with undoubtable skill." Lawson said he believed that manslaughter was a better characterisation of the crime given Ronald's drunken and impaired state. The jury deliberated for 2.5 hours and returned a guilty verdict to capital murder. To convict, they needed to find both acts rea, the guilty act, and mens rea, guilty mind. They rejected that a confused Ronald didn't realise he was holding a knife, the fact that he was carrying a knife to start with, his call with Michael Bloom, and his decision to go on the run proved both aspects to them. Mr Justice Gorman sentenced Ronald to, quote, "suffer death in the manner authorised by law," the updated words for passing a death sentence, which now made no reference to hanging. Ronald was taken to Pentonville Prison and an appeal was immediately lodged. It was heard by the Lord Chief Justice Hubert Parker, Mr Justice Donovan, with Mr Justice Salmon on the 20th of April 1959. It was unsuccessful and an execution date was set for Friday the 8th of May 1959. There was still a lot of support for Ronald, and attempts to save his life came from all walks of life. Albert Evans, the Labour Member of Parliament for Islington South West, where Ronald and his wife lived, petitioned the Home Secretary Richard Austin Butler to grant a reprieve. He even managed to get 150 of his fellow MPs to also sign. No mean feat to get that many politicians to all agree. On the 7th of May, it was announced that the petition was unsuccessful. Butler believed a full and fair trial had taken place, and he could find no reason to intervene. In a last-ditch attempt to save his life, Ronald's family appealed to the Attorney General to intervene, presenting documentation requesting the ability to appeal to the House of Lords. This was denied on a technicality. The family were too late. The presentation needed to have been made within 7 days of the original appeal decision, a fact the family didn't know. Now, this is the third case we have discussed on this channel where the technicality has shut down families' appeals. I believe the courts withheld information about the tight deadline to prevent people who were already panicked by their situation and ignorant of the law from exercising this right of appeal. But that's just my opinion. The evening before the execution, the prisoners of Pentonville made their feelings known, protesting on Ronald's behalf. For 30 minutes they carried out noisy demonstrations and threw burning materials out of the windows before guards locked them down. But Ronald would go to the gallows inside Pentonville Prison at 9 a.m. on the 8th of May 1959. He would be executed by Harry Allen, assisted by Harry Robinson. Outside the prison, 500 demonstrators protested. This crowd would grow throughout the morning for over 1,000. They chanted and held up signs saying "Save Marwood" and "Hanging is no deterrent." Mounted police would be called to disperse the protest, and many would be arrested. The capital conviction and hanging of Ronald Marwood would accelerate the movement to the abolition of capital punishment. MP Mr. E.L. Mallow drew up a motion to present to the House of Commons to disallow the use at trial of confessions made by a suspect to the police unless it was made in the presence of a magistrate. MP Sidney Silverman, representative of Nelson and Colne, tabled a motion on the 12th of May 1959 to abolish capital punishment, the motion citing the anomalies in the 1957 Homicide Act that allowed for Ronald to be hanged. Had Ronald killed his friend Michael, or a member of the rival gang, he wouldn't have faced the noose. So why then, when the victim is a police officer, is that a capital crime? Unrelated to the murder, Sheila Mackenzie, PC Ray Summers' fiancée at the time he was killed, collapsed and passed away in a nightclub in September 1959. She was just 21. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe and let me know what you think of this case in the comments below, and I look forward to welcoming you in the next one.